Okay, when we think of sororities, we think of having the time of our lives, making lasting bonds for life, and sorority conventions and fraternity conventions and rush week and hazing. Well, what if the hazing goes one step too far? What if the sorority members and the fraternity members are in a hive mind? Just like look at Dylan and Bethany waiting 8 hours to call 911. They called their friends in sorority and fraternity uh, over first. So, exactly why did they do that? Were they trying to get an illegal substance out of their house? Were they trying to get paraphernalia out of their house? Now, Alpha Phi and Pi Beta Phi are on probation for basically partying too much, rules violations.
With recent rumors and speculation that several sorority sisters were summoned to the crime scene well before police were contacted, many are wondering how and why it seems that several individuals failed to call 911 to report the gruesome murders of Maddie, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan for 8 whole hours. What could have possibly been more important than calling for help? Was something in that house that could get one or potentially more in a lot of trouble? Join me for an exploration of why a sorority appears to have taken priority that fatal morning, Greek life and its role in decision making.
In the morning, they don't report it or someone doesn't report it till noon. What's that all about? They were in the house. This type of killing, it's going to be loud both by the suspect and the victims. It's going to take a period of time. It's obviously going to be very bloody. And I just don't really understand that, but they are really the key.
The 911 call didn't come until midday the next day. Does that raise any red flags for you? How do you explain that?
I think the investigators are trying to ascertain why there was a delay and what actually occurred, what was heard. That's a question that's still out there.
Do you have any theories of your own?
I don't know. The way everything got brought out was really weird, in my opinion.
The way everything that got brought out was weird, in his opinion.
As far as how the 911 call was made like 8 hours later, I just think the timeline is very strange.
The scene wasn't.
The timeline was very strange.
Chaos, the neighborhood, but it was very, very somber. Like I said, that is a community of college students that live over there. Many of them, through word of mouth, knew what had happened. They were standing outside. There was a lot of crying. There were friends trying to find out who exactly was inside the house. Some family members that arrived on scene. It was incredibly hard for the community, but it was also really, really hard on our officers, some of whom were very young, and that was the first.
Now, who was the family members that were arriving on scene? Was it Maisie Chapin, Hunter Chapin? Was it Xana's sister? Was it the parents? Who were these family members that were arriving on scene?
Real major crime scene that they had encountered. So emotionally, it was a very, very draining day.
ISP won't say who called 911 and would not confirm who found the bodies. ISP says protecting what the young women are telling police could be the key to the entire investigation. And they're hoping the roommates can fill in the timeline between when the murders happened and when someone called 911.
Now, to be clear, I'm not putting a specific organization or Greek life as an entity on trial. A lot of Americans have good experiences in Greek life and leave with experiences, friendships, and social skills, which are all positives. But it's also true that these organizations have a bit of an unsavory reputation, commonly known for reckless behavior, hazing, and alcohol and substance abuse issues. In fact, both Kaylee's sorority, Alpha Phi, as well as Maddie and Xana's sorority, Pi Beta Phi, are both on probation for, quote, violations or concerns regarding risk management.
Violations or concerns regarding risk management.
alcohol and drugs, or hazing, end quote. And unfortunately, it's not uncommon for these activities to end tragically, as time and time again, young lives are lost senselessly, causing these organizations to come under fire.
Birch was rushed to the hospital Thursday after what the university is calling a catastrophic medical emergency.
I don't think anyone realized how intoxicated, actually was.
He was pledging in a fraternity, blindfolded, taken into a room. He was given a bottle of whiskey. We don't know what happened in that room. They're not telling us.
Anything you're trying to protect, brothers, trust me, they don't deserve it.
The number one rule was, you must protect the house.
Hazing doesn't get reported. Everybody is more concerned about saving their own than they are about taking care of the person who could be safe.
They could take a photo, but they couldn't call 911.
Somebody should have done something and could have done something. Anything that could go wrong that night did. And then at the end of the day, nobody got him any help.
Like I said, we wouldn't be sitting here right now having this conversation if one person had made a call. One. We'd have our son.
I think the fact, as far as his story and what's saving lives, is recognizing when somebody is in trouble to actually step in and to do something. Don't be the wallflower. Don't be the one that somebody's telling you not to do it. Step up.
Don't be the wallflower. Don't be the one that's being told what to do. Step up. Why didn't Dylan and Bethany step up? Why were they the freaking wallflowers?
The right thing and make the right decisions.
If you see somebody whose health may be impaired, call us. We'd rather come on those calls and address that health concern before it becomes a tragedy.
Frat in trouble compared to losing a friend, a brother, or whatever in death. You're talking about a fraternity maybe getting a slap on the wrist. I look at it the opposite way. You do the right thing and you call. That's a positive for your fraternity. You might get scolded, you might get suspended for a little bit, but you did the right thing. You were a true brother.
Death of Penn State student Timothy Piazza.
We have new evidence.
Surveillance video that authorities say was once destroyed, now recovered by the FBI.
This is the video that they clearly did not want seen.
Guess what, guys? Now we know.
Prosecutors say the footage from the basement of the Beta Theta Pi house shows fraternity brothers giving the 19-year-old pledge at least 18 drinks of beer, wine, and vodka, all in just an hour and 22 minutes.
I am glad that the basement video was recovered and we finally know what went on down there, because that was the whole defense argument. We don't know.
New charges against a dozen former fraternity brothers, bringing the total to 26. On the night of February 2nd, prosecutors say Piazza and other Beta Theta Pi pledges participated in a drinking challenge called the Gauntlet.
They bring the pledges and make them drink copious amounts of alcohol really quickly.
Piazza eventually suffered a catastrophic fall 15 feet down a flight of stairs. A grand jury report says no one immediately called 911. Instead, previously released surveillance video from the upper floors of the frat house captured hours of Piazza in distress, the injured college sophomore trying to get up and repeatedly falling over. 4 men are seen dragging his limp body upstairs, trying to rouse him by slapping his face and pouring water over him. Instead of dialing 911, the report says the brothers were using their phones to search for the phrases falling asleep after head injury, and a few minutes later, binge drinking, alcohol, bruising or discoloration, cold feet and cold hands. 12 hours after Piazza's fall, the first call for help.
What's going on today?
We have a friend who's unconscious. He hasn't moved. He's cold extremity. It's probably an ambulance.
Tragically, a lot of these fatalities could have been avoided if anyone called 911. But kids all over college campuses are binge drinking and acting rowdy. So it leads one to ask, what is it about Greek life, fraternities, and sororities that seem to produce almost a lethal threat to young college kids? Is it possibly a combination of peer pressure, secrecy, loyalty, and social intimidation that all contribute to a culture of concealment and confused priorities among young adults on college campuses?
Come on, you guys. You're doing this because you're supposed to be together and it's lifelong and it's all this stuff. Well, the bond starts right there. You see somebody in trouble, help that somebody. There's amnesty laws in just about every state.
Cordell Davis, a fraternity brother who was at the event that night, says he tried to get Piazza the help he needed.
I was screaming and yelling. I was saying, we need to take him to a hospital. We should call an ambulance, dial 911.
It's nice that he had good intentions at the time, but I don't know why anybody didn't pick up a phone.
The bystander effect occurs when the presence of others discourages an individual from intervening in an emergency situation against a bully or during an assault or other crime. The greater the number of bystanders, the less likely it is for any of them to provide help to a person in distress. People are more likely to take action in a crisis when there are few or no other witnesses present. Hive mentality, also known as groupthink, is when a person has a strong tendency to fall for group decision-making. If someone has a hive mentality, they feel invulnerable and morally correct when they're part of a certain group. They may also not be able to make decisions on their own. They often feel isolated or stressed when making decisions. That's why they turn to a hive mentality.
I remember one night we had to clean out like a bunch of different rooms. And like that was kind of like the hazing thing. And this kid was like, I don't want to do this. Like, are you kidding me? Like, this is like so tedious. And he left that night. My mentality is different than other kids. Like, I like doing that hardcore shit. I like building a team. I like building around other people, but not everybody does. So like they joined the fraternity and like that kid walked out that night, but like he wasn't really liked anymore. And like that's something that probably should change.
So what does this have to do with a quadruple homicide case, you may be asking? When we consider that all 4 of our victims were involved in Greek life, the 2 survivors were involved in Greek life, and the house itself was situated proudly on Greek Row, it's worth asking the question if this same pattern of irresponsibility could be a likely explanation for that 8-hour time gap. Really, the only logical explanation that I can think of for that time gap when we know that others were phoned before police, in my opinion, is I think that it's drug related. I think something had to be removed from the house. And considering that both sororities were on probation, so it is possible that the witnesses may have called friends and sorority sisters, get rid of some sort of paraphernalia or something like that. That's really the only logical explanation I can think of. That time could have also been used to clean up the scene, maybe not in a nefarious way, but who knows? Again, I'm not here to bash college students, Greek life, or the younger generation, but there is a pattern of apathy, recklessness, and selfishness that I can't really let go here. When you think about the fact that all 4 victims laid cold and stiff in a pool of their own blood for 8 hours while the campus played telephone and the crime scene may have been irreparably compromised. I know I'm not alone here and that a lot of people are bothered by this particular part of the timeline. It makes no sense and really goes against everything we know as humans and our basic principles of integrity and common sense. Are we so desperate to belong that we can become detached from these big?
Remember, we do this for Kaylee, Ethan, Maddie, and Xana. Dylan and Bethany let them lay in a pool of their own blood for 8 hours, cold and stiff. While, just like she said, they played telephone.
Basic human values? And that's the question that I'm posing about what happened in those 8 hours.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room, guys, the surviving roommates.
Confusing and controversial aspect of the Idaho 4 case is the surviving roommates, DM and BF, and their actions or lack thereof on the morning of November 13th, leading many to question the 8-hour gap in the timeline and why they didn't call 911 sooner. In this video, I hope to ask some of these questions and examine some possible theories in a manner that is respectful, nuanced, and accurate, because I don't think these girls deserve to be harassed, but the questions do remain. As a reminder, it's not victim blaming to ask questions, and if you have already made up your mind that these two are victims and they deserve to be left alone, then this may not be the video for you. So with that being said, if you're someone who likes to examine these cases from all angles and at an unbiased perspective, please give this video a like and let's get right into it.
What do you make of this revelation that about the two other roommates?
I think it's interesting and also odd. I mean, if this murder occurred at 4 a.m, they don't report it, or someone doesn't report it till noon. What's that all about? They are the key, George, to this case. They were in the house. This type of killing, it's going to be loud, both by the suspect and the victims. It's going to take a period of time. It's obviously going to be very bloody. And I just don't really understand that, but they are really the key.
Are they suspects?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, they're not talking about them being suspects at all.
Well, they should be suspects. They really should be suspects for obstruction of justice for not calling 911 for 8 hours.
All I'm suggesting, it is an odd thing, right? If you're in a house, 4 people are brutally killed, and nobody contacts the police for another 8 hours, there's a big issue with that.
Not ruled out the 2 surviving female roommates.
Correct.
You have not ruled them out as suspects?
Correct. So let me clarify that. No one has been ruled included or excluded as a person of interest and or a suspect. Everyone is still being investigated.
Are they witnesses?
They are working and talking with detectives, and they have been cooperative, very cooperative with detectives.
ISP won't say who called 911 and would not confirm who found the bodies. ISP says protecting what the young women are telling police could be the key to the entire investigation. And they're hoping the roommates can fill in the timeline between when the murders happened and when someone called 911.
What do you think happened here when that roommate came out and she said she saw him? She locked herself in the bedroom after that, but she didn't call police.
It's difficult for me to process that. And I think it's difficult for a lot of people to process that, hearing that information. We don't know what kind of state of mind she was in. And as you mentioned, she's living in this house. It's as quoted, a party house. A lot of things going on late at night in that house. Did she think this was a prank? Did she think this was just somebody who was unruly and getting kicked out of the house? Was this a fight between friends? Who knows what she thought in that moment? I can only imagine how terrified she might have been. It's unfortunate she didn't call until noon the next day, but we'll learn more.
Let's start with the basics. Why would the murderer spare the lives of 2 roommates in the off-campus home? According to Kohberger's probable cause affidavit, a roommate referred to as DM says she saw a figure, quote, clad in black clothing and mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking toward her. She told authorities she was in the, quote, frozen in shock phase as the killer walked past.
I don't buy the frozen in shock phase, and I don't buy her description of a man clad in black. Ain't no 21-year-old or 20-year-old says clad in black. I don't buy her story at all.
After that, DM locked herself in her bedroom.
Lead investigators to believe the deaths happened between 4 and 4:25 a.m. Here's what happened starting at 4 a.m. according to the affidavit. Police say Xana Kernodle received a DoorDash order at the house at about 4 a.m. Cell phone data also shows that she was likely awake and using the TikTok app at 4:12 a.m. A surviving roommate who lived at the house, referred to as DM in the court documents, told police something woke her up at about 4 4 a.m., but thought it sounded like Gonsalves playing with her dog in one of the upstairs bedrooms.
And told police that earlier she heard a female voice say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." And later, a male voice saying something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you."
At 4,
What killer goes, "It's okay, I'm going to help you"? That almost sounds like a paramedic or a law enforcement, or maybe Ethan telling Xana he was going to help her. But what killer says, "It's okay, I'm going to help you"?
4:17 a.m., a security camera in the area picked up a distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper, followed by a loud thud. At 4:20 a.m., a vehicle matching the description of the white Hyundai Elantra was spotted speeding away.
It was later in the morning when that call was made to 911 from one of the surviving roommates' phones to report an unconscious person. It is unclear what occurred in the hours before police were called.
911, what's your emergency?
Detectives believe that on November 12th, the two surviving roommates had also been out in the Moscow community separately, but returned home by 1 a.m. on November 13th. The two did not wake up until later that morning. On November 13th, the surviving roommates summoned friends to the
Okay, the roommates did not wake up till later that morning. Then how do you explain Dylan opening her door 3 times that night? If she was quote unquote asleep. That's hogwash.
residents because they believed one of the second floor victims had passed out and was not waking up. At 11:58 a.m., a 911 call requested aid for an unconscious person. The call was made from one of the surviving roommates' cell phones inside the residence. Multiple people talked with the 911 dispatcher before Moscow police arrived to the location. Officers entered the residence and found 2 victims on the second floor and 2 victims on the third floor. Now, I, like most people, have problems here. 8 hours is a very long time to be in an active crime scene with victims who have sustained injuries of this magnitude.
All murdered through stabbing with some kind of probably a larger knife.
She told police some of the 4 victims had defensive wounds, but none had signs of sexual assault.
What is it that you saw?
Well, there was a lot of blood. It was a very sad scene with. For murdered college students.
One of the responding officers described the overwhelming smell of blood upon entering the residence, and I just can't understand how it wasn't obvious that carnage happened in that house the night before. I just cannot get past the smell, the blood, the quietness, you're in a house with 4 corpses that are entering the initial stages of decomposition. I just cannot get past that. And then that leads me to ask the question whether the doors were closed and how far into the crime scene they actually entered to make the determination that someone was unconscious, let alone deceased with stab wounds for 8 hours. I understand trauma and panic and all of that, but I really would like to understand better what time these girls woke up, and secondly, who and how many people were summoned to the crime scene before police? Because this behavior to me comes off like they're trying to hide something. And look, I was in college once. I lived in a house with 5 other girls, and we liked to party.
I totally agree. They are trying to hide something. The smell of the blood described by the officer entering the scene was overpowering. Not to mention 4 dead college students laying in a puddle of their own blood. And just like she said, the beginning stages of decomposition. So how can 2 quote unquote surviving roommates not smell the blood or not smell the smell of decomposing bodies, but yet call friends over before even calling 911? That don't make no sense. If the cops can smell blood, the 2 roommates could smell blood too. An overwhelming smell of blood. But yet, these 2 did nothing. They called some friends over and let their friends make the 911 call.
There's nothing wrong with that. But I have to wonder if there's something more sinister here. Not necessarily murder. I'm not inculpating these 2 in terms of their involvement with what happened on November 13th, but it's possible that there were goings-ons in that house that perhaps needed to be taken care of before a swarm of police officers come. But that being said, it's just not that serious. Listen, if you're ever in a scenario where you're doing something, maybe, um, you got some drugs on you or something, and somebody's life is in danger, or, it's up to you to report a death, police don't care if you've got a blunt on you. If you're honest and straight up, you're not gonna get in trouble. And I just cannot help but feel this sense of self-preservation before everything else here. And that's where my empathy ends. I'm sorry. I understand trauma. And, this is if they don't have anything to do with this, which again, I'm not saying they do, but if they are really these innocent bystanders, one of the most traumatic things to ever happen. But if we're gonna play that trauma defense, then we can't play some of these other defenses, such as, well, maybe she thought it was just some random person there to party and, just some normal occurrence. You can't claim both of those to run defense for these guys. There are just so many measures that if we're to believe what's in front of us about DM specifically, there's so many self-preservation measures that she took before getting police involved. And that's where I have a problem. This just feels rotten to me. It feels like a lack of common sense or a lack of empathy and compassion. And I don't know which one's worse. When I try to engage in online conversations about this, I get hit with the same excuse, this leave the poor girl alone. She's a traumatized child. You have no idea how you would act in that scenario. I do know how I'd act in that scenario. My ass would call 911. And to say that I don't know what I would do is questioning my intelligence and the intelligence of women in general, frankly. If this was a house full of young men and 2 survived, and one described a masked intruder and they didn't call 911 until 8 hours later. The I fell asleep, but I was also traumatized. I slept in too late, but I also called some friends over to help me make that 911 call. The public would be after them, and there would be no generous benefit of the doubt given like it is in this scenario. So yeah, it's an insult to women in general. These are adults. If you're going to act like an adult, I'm sorry, there are adult responsibilities that you need to take, but you have a duty to care, maybe not legally, but ethically and morally as a friend. And maybe there's something that we don't know that fills in the gaps here, but I have a feeling it's not going to be a favorable fact for the witness. I think it's going to be something that paints them out to be not the greatest person, whether that is just additional self-preservation steps that may have been taken, or perhaps more sinister. I don't know. A general rule I like to live by is if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And if you think this is harsh, these are questions that are going to be asked very aggressively by a defense attorney. So they need to be asked. And to make excuses for somebody's behavior that you don't know is weird. Okay? It's weird to take up defense for somebody and just assume that this is a trauma response, when even police have said that they're still trying to figure out why this odd gap in the timeline. They've conceded that it's odd. And I think that's because we don't have the information we need to fill that gap in. And again, I have a feeling it's not going to make these witnesses look good.
I agree 100%. It's not going to make these witnesses look good. Their lack of empathy, their lack of remorse, not calling 911 for 8 hours shows a very big lack of empathy and lack of remorse coming from Bethany and Dylan. Like, what were they trying to hide? Did they want to get some paraphernalia out of the house? Did they want to get some drugs out of the house? Is that why they called the sororities and the fraternities over first before they called 911 and just let the sororities and the fraternities talk to the police instead of them talking to the police? We won't know this until the day of the trial, which isn't until next year. And I hope Ann Taylor hammers them for the 8-hour delay. I really hope she hammers them for that. Like always, guys, like, subscribe, and comment on my channel. Hit that bell notification for any new uploads. And click the link for W Energy in the description. All members and subscribers get 10% off their first order. At the checkout, just put in the coupon code True Crime Cult 162 in all caps. You also have a good Tuesday night. This is TCC out.